And joining me in studio now is Jeremy Saltan, political advisor for the Yamina party. And Jeremy, a change for you. Naftali Bennett, your party leader that is no longer the prime minister. But Yair Lapid steps in 4 months before the election and tells his ministers, try not to play politics. Let's be honest, that's impossible.
Well, I mean, all politicians like to play politics, but there's a spectrum. And I do think that in this government, unlike other governments, you do have a real shot of a lot of the ministers choosing to spend more time on the campaign trail as opposed to their own ministry.
I would think so. I would think so. How much do you think that would impact on the government's priorities? It's limited into what it could achieve, but at least rhetorically and within the limitations of what they have, they can make moves that could certainly definitely impact on elections.
Yeah, but there is a legal framework in play to prevent any minister from trying to go a little bit too far. You also have the Attorney General who plays a role here when there are questionable things that come up. But more importantly, what is different between going between election 4 and 5 compared to the other elections is we have a much longer election season. One of the elections was even less than 3 months long. This one is over 4 months long. Because it's much longer, it's going to be a little bit more restraint required from the ministers not to take things a little bit too far.
Let's talk about your own party, Yamina, for a minute, because it's having some issues, a lot of questions, whether even by the end of today, and I should explain by midnight tonight, I believe MKs that want to switch parties will have to make their decision and make an announcement. There's some speculation about members of your own party, whether it can even hold together. And yet, according to the most recent polls, once again, Yamina may be the deciding factor in who forms the next government.
Well, you know, I think it's a little bit premature to go to coalition building quite yet. But just to clarify,
I understand that, but I'm going the most recent polls.
I want to go ahead and answer some of the things you mentioned. First of all, clarify that the deadline tonight is not for people switching parties. Rather, it's for them to be able to leave with their campaign funding units. That's the crucial element in terms of tonight's deadline.
In fact, though, many people say that without that funding, practically no party will accept another. It's unlikely they'd accept another MK.
You know, I'm not going to speak for other party leaders. I can tell you about our faction right now. We have Ayelet. We have, of course, Ayelet Shaked, the Interior Minister. We have Deputy Minister of Religious Services, Matan Kahana. We have Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Abir Kara. MK Shirley Pinto. We have the former MK Yom Tov Kalfon, who is still with us. So we still have a lot of candidates and a lot of members of the faction who are currently with us. What will happen when we get towards mid-August, when we get to that point where people sort of get towards the submission of the party lists? We're not there yet. I'm sure that when we get a little bit closer, there'll be more discussion on that issue.
Right. Let's talk about Yair Lapid, who, in a sense, made his debut last night in his first televised national address as prime minister. Now, I'm trying to ask you, just as a political advisor, your view on that address, calling for unity, though many people read it as a attack or criticism of his primary opponent in this election, Benjamin Netanyahu.
I mean, obviously, you always have to show contrast between yourself and the person that you're running against for the position that you want to maintain. But I think he was able to hit on a number of points that were important in terms of both the record of the current coalition as well as the vision that he has towards the next government that he would like to form. Of course, it's, you know, the maiden speech. It's the first speech. We'll hear many speeches afterwards. But he was able to make, I feel, good balance between, if you will, what you're expecting to see in that sort of inaugural speech, as well as get in some very important campaigning that is necessary to be able to really distinguish himself from the other players within his bloc, within his camp, as well as the contender for premiership that he's going against.
Jeremy, let's talk about, actually, you could call it the first clash. Some might argue the first campaign clash between interim Prime Minister Yair Lapid and Benjamin Netanyahu. Prime Minister Lapid has so supposedly insisted that Benjamin Netanyahu receive security briefings as head of the opposition in person from himself, as well as the military secretary. That's something which former Prime Minister Bennett did not insist on. He was not in those meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu. Lapid says he should be in the meeting. You could understand Netanyahu not wanting to look like he's receiving information from Prime Minister Lapid during election season. What do you think of this move? Was it a mistake, for example, for Bennett not to insist on that?
I thought it was a mistake for Netanyahu not to show up to these meetings. I know that former Prime Minister Bennett was very much trying to push Netanyahu to go ahead and do that, but he didn't do that in the public arena. Lapid is deciding to take this to the public arena because it's something that bothers him. I think it's someone that should, it's something that should bother everyone within the political arena, because your expectation is that the opposition leader fulfills his responsibility. And part of that is being able to get briefings in terms of the various elements, in terms of the, if you will, struggles, challenges, obstacles that we have on the security front. It's been now over a year since Netanyahu has been briefed on these issues. It makes sense, if he wants to run to be prime minister, to speak about these issues, whether it's Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, or otherwise, that he should do so from an intelligent position of not reading things from the press, but from actually getting the briefings from the professionals, not just from the prime minister, I should say, but just also from the various elements within the professional security establishment who attend these briefings and are able to provide context and answer the questions that the opposition leader might have. To me, again, the fact that we went over a year without Netanyahu actually going ahead and attending these meetings, to me, that has been very puzzling.
All right. And one last question, Yair Lapid. How much of an advantage now? We've seen him in action. We've seen him begin as prime minister, maybe get at least a bit of a taste. How much of an impact from what we've seen do you think he'll be able to translate that into some kind of advantage at the polls as the incumbent?
Well, one thing we've learned from Israeli elections is really only the last week matters. So, what he can try to do is just set the tone, set the pace, make sure that he has good momentum. But we are very, very early. And like I said, what's very important for people to understand, this is the longest campaign season of the 5 campaigns that we've seen within the last 3 years. Because it's so long, it's very important to pace yourself, because if you don't, you have this fear of maybe running out of steam too early. And I think that's something that some of the political leaders have noticed as being very important at the start of this race.
I think what they've noticed is the public running out of steam too early and not, losing their patience with these campaigns. We'll see how they do over the next 4 months. Jeremy Saltan, political advisor to the Yamina party. Thank you for joining.